One of the most frequent types of comments I get is usually along the lines of, I don't really like what you're reviewing here, but you should check out this other watch or other brand instead. And if it's not something I'm familiar with, I always check it out. And if it's something I like, then I add it to my ever-growing list of watches to check out. And every once in a while, I'll just flat out order it or immediately reach out to the company. Which is really how this whole video got started, when I reached out to Lilienthal Berlin and they were kind enough to give me a watch to review. If you're not familiar, they're a small brand based out of Germany. And I'd say that all of their watches incorporate a modern minimalist design, complete with a hidden crown. However, the coolest aspect of the brand is that all of their watches are made in Germany. Now, they only have 4 different models, but they have a ton of different colorways. And surprisingly, the watch that really caught my attention wasn't their higher-end Zeitgeist automatic, although I think the blue one does look particularly cool. But the one that caught my attention was the super thin quartz L1 watch, and specifically the L1 Fire, where its sunburst gunmetal gray dial mixed with these orange highlights just immediately captured my attention. There are 2 different sizes of the L1, a larger 42.5 and a smaller 37.5. And here they did send me the larger, which as you can see is just sort of this wide black disc with these narrow stubby lugs coming out at either end. Now even with the crown, this watch is only 37.8 millimeters, as that crown is tucked in and almost hidden from view when looking straight down. So even before you get to the dial or the DLC coated steel case, this is one that has an unusual look. Now, lug to lug is a moderate 49, but the L1 takes full advantage of the thinner Ronda SlimTech 1069 movement. It may be quartz, but it's a pretty thin quartz watch at 7.5 millimeters. So this is definitely one that should never get in the way of what you're wearing. And at 92 grams with a mesh bracelet, I think it hits a sweet spot where it's light enough you can forget you're wearing it, yet still feels weighty enough that when you pick it up, you know it has a solid build. There's also a 20mm lug width, so plenty of strap options out there. And there are 3 currently with Lilienthal Berlin, although this one with the black DLC coated steel might be a little hard to match with. Now, rounding out the specs, you also have 50 meters of water resistance. I always like to see a little bit more, but as casual watches go, this is perfectly appropriate. The case is a brush 316 stainless, and in this particular instance, it has a black DLC coating. So there's always a uniform smooth touch to it, as well as this sort of flying saucer look. Just like the dial, it's a bit modern and a bit minimalist. The bezel edges aren't very wide, so most of the watch is just this wide expansive dial, to the point that I think it has more of a 43 or 44mm presence to it. So if you're someone that thinks a 42mm diver is pushing it, then you definitely want to look at the smaller 37.5 version. Looking at the side, you can see that it has a flat rounded edge at its widest point. But then the case tapers as it goes towards the case back, as well as towards the crystal. The crystal is listed as a sapphire hardened mineral crystal, and I'm guessing that means sapphire coated, which I think is going to be my biggest complaint with the L1. I mean, it's better than straight mineral or polymer, but I would prefer flat sapphire just for better scratch resistance. Now, moving to the back, you can see that the case back is more of a straight stainless. It's not really a complex design, but it does have a nice L1 engraved in it. It's also secured with 3 small screws, so it should be rather straightforward to change the battery. Just don't lose those screws when you're doing it. And at this angle, you can also get a good look at the crown, which has an orange band just for a little bit of flair. The crown isn't completely circular, it's more of a polygon, and those short flat edges do help to get a grip on it once you pop it out. And popping out that crown is my only other real complaint. It's kind of hard to describe. I mean, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. It's just that when you pull it out, there's no sound or click or any sort of response. It just stops like you're hitting a wall. You're not really getting the normal engagement, and it's not really satisfying when you set the time, which sounds kind of stupid when I say it, but that's really the best way to describe it. Although in the grand scheme of things, this may be a minor aspect. I mean, this is a quartz watch without a date, so realistically, you'll only be touching the crown a couple times a year. Now, the dial itself has a rather simple execution. Nothing is applied, and everything is just painted on. So I think it's more about the material and the design itself, which I think is brilliantly done. The dial is this striking gunmetal gray sunburst. It's really fantastic to look at when the light hits it just right, but it's also a bit reflective, and I don't think the crystal has any AR coating, so that is one thing they could improve on. Now, the first thing on the dial you'll notice is the edge, where it has this sort of Flieger type B-style minute track to it, minus the triangle at the top, of course. And then moving in, you see that there's an inner dial with hour indicators, except the top of that track has an L1 instead of a 12, and the bottom has a slightly sunken sub-second hand with a cool circular grooved pattern, and that pattern is something I always love when I see it. And here that sub-second hand also has a sunburst effect, but it's one that's orthogonal to the main dial. The majority of the dial is painted on in black, except for the cardinal minute indicators and that inner circle, which is a nice vibrant orange. Now, in lower lighted conditions, that black text often fades into the background. It's still there, but it's not quite as easy to see, and it really doesn't pop like that orange. Now, in keeping with its Bauhaus-style origins, the hands are narrow sticks, and at first glance, I think the hour hand appears to be a bit short, but it does extend beyond the hour indicators of the inner track. Now, in the past, I've talked about how designs create a crosshair effect, which I think really focuses your eyes on the dial, and I think this is the clearest example I've seen with that orange. And as a whole, I think it makes it a rather effective and easy to read design. Not to mention, it's just striking and kind of unusual to look at. Now, when it comes to the Lume, I honestly didn't have a whole lot of confidence in this one, especially considering how narrow those hands are. But I found it surprisingly decent for what it is. Now, I already showed off this footage with the Zelos Nova, and while the L1 doesn't quite keep up with that Nova, it easily outlasts the Orient TriStar and just slightly outlasts the Vostok Amphibia Diver. So overall, it's pretty good for just a casual sports watch. Now, I believe there are currently 3 options in terms of straps for the L1 Fire. There's a standard black leather, a black mesh bracelet, and a cork option. And all of those are quick release. Now, I can't really say much about that cork, other than it's unusually interesting. But they did send me both the leather and the mesh bracelet, and both of them are great. The quality of the leather is only genuine, but it's handcrafted in Germany, and it has a great soft and supple feel to it. It's really a great strap, and I'd love a jacket made out of this. The only weak point I saw with this is that the keepers are a little thin, and I think they might stretch out in time. Now, generally I'm not a fan of mesh bracelets. I'd much prefer solid links or just a leather strap. But this one surprised me at how much I liked it, and I liked it more than the leather strap. The black coating matches the watch nicely, and I think gives it a great look. It's also complete with a nice signed clasp, and one with a great action. But more importantly, I think the mesh easily conforms to your wrist and gives you a very comfortable and fairly breathable alternative. So if I were to order one of these, I think the mesh would be my first choice. Now, regardless of what you put this thing on, it's fairly comfortable to wear. It does feel a little flat and a little wide, but that's really because it is. Overall though, I think it is comfortable and one you can easily wear throughout the day. And one advantage of that tapering caseback is that it leaves a smaller, narrower footprint that connects to your wrist. So even with this big presence, I think it feels a little smaller on your wrist than it is. All in all, it's a pretty cool, solidly well-made watch, but it's not going to be for everyone. And I think for some people, the design is going to put them off, and for others, it's that quartz movement. And for some, it's the combination of both along with the price. It's currently listed at $269, but they did give me a 25% discount code to share, so that brings it down to just over $200, which isn't bad, but at that price, I'd feel a lot better if this had sapphire. And as quartz watches go, you are paying a little bit of a premium. But it is a German-made watch with some quality components and a rather unique design. I know I haven't seen anything quite like it. And for some, that's a pretty big factor. So if you're looking for something that's minimal yet modern, slim yet with a big presence, then the L1 line is worth taking a look at. But what do you think of the L1 Fire? Make sure you let me know down below. Or if you can think of another quartz watch that does it better, let me know that too. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.